Richard, thank you very much. You've captured very well, and I think nice and frankly the challenges we're talking about today. I have to say you reminded me of my non-expertise. In preparing for this session, I did have to keep Googling HTA, Health Technology Assessments, and SROI, Social Return on Investment. I'm getting better. I will try to avoid the acronyms. I plead with everyone to do that. Again, thank you. Our next speaker is Peter Orchard. Peter is CEO of Canteen, Australia's leading youth cancer charity, providing evidence-based support to young people and families impacted by cancer. Peter has worked with young people for over 30 years and has served as Deputy CEO at Headspace and Director of Australian Healthcare Associates. Peter, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Karen. Firstly, I just want to acknowledge Richard Vines, CEO of Rare Cancers Australia. We have loved working with the Rare Cancers team, Richard, on this project. Such an important project, and you were the driving force. You were the one who said we need to do this, and we were happy to come along for the ride, really, so great work. Thank you. I'm also grateful for the opportunity to speak to you all. Let me get my clicker happening, get that face off the screen, and then we'll get the better faces on the screen. Canteen clearly is interested in young people. We are working with 12 to 25-year-olds who are dealing with the impact of cancer in their lives, whether it be their own diagnosis or that of a close family member like a parent or sibling, or the tragic loss of a family member to cancer. We know the costs of cancer are not just financial. This is highlighted by the impact cancer has had on 3 young Canteen board directors, and I'm going to talk you through them today. Sinead Carnell's first experience with cancer was at 10 years old when her dad was diagnosed with bowel cancer. Fortunately, he has been in remission since 2009. Fast forwarding to high school though, just before her Year 12 exams, Sinead's mum was diagnosed with metastatic melanoma. Tragically, she passed away at the start of 2016. Soon after she joined Canteen, Sinead realised that she was not alone, and she was able to learn how to manage her overwhelming sense of grief through the counselling and peer support from Canteen. Now at 24 years old, she sits on Canteen's board of directors, having experienced firsthand the empowerment and support that Canteen offers. While outside of Canteen, Sinead is working as a doctor in a public hospital in Perth. Malia Emerson Lafawai, just shuffling my papers, sorry, joined Canteen in 2017 at the age of 21, a year after her mum's cancer diagnosis. Her mum, Jill, was only 58 years old. Before Canteen, Malia was convinced that no one would understand what she was going through. She describes her first few sessions as a revelation. Malia has been in therapy with Canteen for 4 years. She says Canteen kept her afloat when her mum went into palliative care and died at the end of 2019. Malia completed a law degree a year after her mum died. The thing that we all understand in this room, and that we need government to understand in terms of the HTA review, is that when one person in the family is diagnosed and treated for cancer, everyone in that family is impacted, regardless of whether it is a child or a parent who is diagnosed. If we just look at mental health and well-being, putting aside the many, many other impacts of cancer, we can see just how significant a cost cancer can have on an individual, community and economy. Up to 90% of parents and 50% of children and young people will experience a mental health disorder, such as depression, PTSD or anxiety, or related symptoms as a direct result of their cancer. I first met Joey Lynch 9.5 years ago. Joey is chair of Canteen's board And at 15 years of age, he was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma stage 3B. This kick-started a long journey of many, many different treatments, including the second stem cell transplant, giving Joey severe, life-threatening graft versus host disease. In 2015, there were no curative options left in Australia. But Joey wasn't done with living, so he looked overseas. And at that stage, I saw Joey for the second time, and I didn't recognise him. When I first saw him, he was this big, fit young man. He was painfully thin, and there was twice that year we thought he would die. But he wasn't done, and so he found an early phase CAR T clinical trial in the US. Only snag was it cost $840,000 and the money had to be paid up front. A daunting task for a young man with no savings. So of course his parents came in behind him, mortgaged their house, and that paid for half of it, and then the other half came from the community coming in behind him in their droves. This clinical trial bought Joey more time, but he relapsed. Then Joey was put on fortnightly infusions of an immunotherapy agent. However, another snag, it cost $76,000 for the first year of treatment for that agent. And that came out of Joey's pocket. And we thought then he was going to go on to compassionate access. And we thought, great, the costs are done. He is now really able to just get on with life. However, roll forward 3 years, and in 2 months he's found out he has to pay $33,000 for another year of treatment with the same agent. So now what for Joey? His specialist has advised him that he can't possibly risk another relapse. There will be no coming back from that. And so he should continue the treatment. Right now, Joey is shocked. He and his partner had started thinking about their future, and now he thinks those things just can't happen. He can't afford to do those things and pay for treatment. However, this young man has not stopped living. Even when he was at his sickest, he was still going to the Canteen office for the local youth committee meetings or to interview potential staff. His commitment to young people impacted by cancer has been unrelenting and enormously impactful. He advocated in 2015 when he was advocating for clinical trials with us when he wasn't going to benefit from those trials. And we persuaded the then Minister Susan Lee, and really it was Joey who did it, to invest $5 million in clinical trials for adolescents and young adults. Just like Richard's group, and that group is a very large group, adolescents and young adults experience rare or rarer cancers, and so they don't have access to the same trials that are there for the larger cancer groups. So that was Joey's advocacy that got us there. He also got on with his life in every other way possible. If anyone was a case in point in terms of this report, it's Joey Lynch. Palliative and expected to die in 2015. 7 years later, Joey is still alive and well and living life absolutely to the full. He is continuing to do work for Canteen. He's continuing to drive his sporting journalism career. He's doing all of those other things. He's been living successfully because of his fortnightly infusions of an immunotherapy agent. His extension of life has become a life being lived, and yet he is required to fund a pharmaceutical that is clearly working. Paying to live is just not right when there is no rational reason for it. Sorry. Went one too far, or it's missing. So why is this report important to us? Look, we've joined with Rare Cancers on this because of Joey, because of Malia, because of Sinead. Their lives lived without family members, or their lives lived paying for their cancer treatment, have been hugely impacted. Sinead and Malia would have loved their mother to have lived more years. They would have loved their mothers to see them graduate, one as a doctor and the other as a lawyer. And that is now lost to them. In terms of Joey, he continues to live, but all of his aspirations for the future are now in doubt as he continues to pay huge sums of money, almost up to $1 million it's cost him so far since 2015. We need this report to be heard. We need to get behind this report and drive it hard with government. And it's wonderful that we've got Andrew here today from the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee. And I want to acknowledge Andrew for his work with adolescents, young adults. He's been involved with Canteen for a period of time, overseeing our youth cancer services. So it's been wonderful having his involvement there, and have deep respect for Andrew. But we really need this message to get through that cancer must be costed differently. This is an investment, not a cost to Australia. So thank you. Now, I get to keep going just for a moment because I need to introduce someone very special as well. I got spoilt on this one. I met Sean 10 years ago, and Sean, now it's 14 it should be, sorry, there's an error there. Sean, 29 years, joined Canteen at 14 because his mother had advanced cancer. He commenced as a Canteen board director at the age of 21 and finished last August at the AGM. He's been a wonderful advocate for young people, and he's been incredibly supportive of young people dealing with cancer. And he was recognised for that as the ACT Young Australian of the Year for 2022. So please welcome Sean Dondas to the stage.
Thank you, Peter, for that introduction. I want to thank Rare Cancers Australia and Canteen for inviting me to share my story today at CANFORUM. It is an honour to speak about the impact of the death of my mum, Saluna, on myself and my two younger brothers, Matthew and Aaron. In a fortnight, it'll mark 13 years since she died from cervical cancer. Before I speak about the ripple effect that Mum's death had on our family, I want to briefly talk about Father's Day. I haven't seen my dad in over 20 years. Last time I heard from him was when he called after Mum's death to say that he could only look after 2, not 3 of us brothers, as he'd remarried for the 3rd time with another child. Part of the reason why Mum's death is harder is because Mum's family is all based in Malaysia. Losing Mum was like losing Mum, Dad, Auntie, Uncle, Grandma, Grandpa, because she played all these roles. Therefore, I want to acknowledge all the parents and parental figures in the audience who play an important role on Father's Day. This brings us back to the central question of this forum. What is the value of a life? What is the value of Mum's life? Does Mum's life cease to have value after death? These are difficult questions, especially as her value to me isn't the same as your loved ones are to you and your families. Mum was born in Kuching, Malaysia. She was the youngest of 5 daughters. Fiercely independent, she had hopes and dreams. She wanted to see the world. She married my dad and moved back with him to Perth. Over the next 4 years, she had myself, Matthew, and Aaron. My parents separated shortly after. We became a tight-knit family of 4. Mum was the driving force, single-handedly raising us 3 boys by herself with little support. We didn't have much financially or access to social networks, but we did have love and each other, and that's all we needed. Life was tough. Mum ensured we had a roof over our heads, even if it meant constantly renting. She ensured we had food on the table, even if it meant we relied at times on organisations such as St. Vinny's. Mum ensured we had the best education, even if it meant social stigma from parents at school because we were poor, didn't have a dad, or relied on public transport. The first time cancer crashed into our life was in 2005. I was in year 7, and we were living in an old and mouldy 1-bedroom apartment. It was a school night, and Mum was feeling unwell. So unwell that she had to call an ambulance and rush her to hospital. That was the first night my brothers and I were left alone. The first night I was responsible for looking after my younger brothers. The first night we knew our lives would never be the same. During that period, I was always anxiously hearing ambulance sirens, thinking it would be Mum and we'd never see her again. Mum eventually came home and told us she had cervical cancer, but she was going to have surgery. My mind stopped thinking about the worst case scenario. My brothers and I could relax and focus on our education and just be young people like our peers. I was 12 years old, but as the eldest sibling, it meant stepping up and taking on additional household responsibilities such as cleaning, washing, shopping, and paying bills. The next few years were happier and cancer-free. This photo was taken on Mum's 35th birthday and my first day of high school at Trinity College in East Perth after receiving a bursary. Mum also completed her diploma of early childhood education. We were proud of her, especially as English was Mum's second language. Mum was always big on education as the pathway out of poverty. A good education would lead to good employment, which would allow us to live the life that she couldn't provide for us. But the good times eventually came to an end. It was late 2007, Mum had relapsed with cervical cancer, and this time it was terminal. Her life was now chemotherapy and radiotherapy. She hated the side effects, losing hair, vomiting, and then there were the silver chain nurse visits. She hated hospitals, especially the invasive checkups and cultural stigma coming from a migrant background. My brothers would accompany Mum to hospital during school time. This is always a source of guilt for me and tension with my brothers. Should I focus less on my education so I can spend time with Mum, even if that were her wishes? Would it have made a difference? Mum was trying to set up our long-term future, even if it meant sacrifices in the short term. It felt that Mum was alive, but she wasn't living, she was existing. The impact of cancer created a lot of burdens on our home life. It was the hopelessness rather than the potential homelessness that was worse. The feeling that nothing was improving, the feeling that nothing really mattered, the feeling there were only two ways that Mum was no longer going to be in pain and finding an effective cancer treatment was not going to happen soon. My sense of hopelessness eventually lifted. In 2008, a hospital social worker referred me and Matthew to Canteen. This moment changed my life forever. I got to meet young people like me who'd been through a similar cancer experience. So Sunday morning, 20th September 2009, this was the beginning of the ripple effect. This is the day that Mum died, after a period of palliative and end-of-life care. She was only 38 years old. My brothers and I became wards of the state and placed into foster care. Our schooling was uncertain, our finances were uncertain, our futures were uncertain. When life was looking down, it was Canteen that gave me the support to look up. They were the first person I called for emotional support. Through formal counselling, I processed my angry feelings and developed effective coping strategies to deal with Mum's death. Through the support of Canteen, I could focus on finishing year 12, get good grades, and start university, just as Mum had wanted for me. Through Canteen's leadership programs, I developed the skills to advocate for and protect my two younger brothers. This meant dealing with Department of Child Protection staff, foster carers, and teachers. It meant not allowing my dad to separate us. It meant pushing back against Mum's family who wanted us to move to Malaysia, even though we never spoke Malay. There are three things to consider how we value a life. The first is money. Mum never mentioned the cost of cancer. She knew she never had enough to provide the basics in our life, let alone cancer treatments outside of the public system. Mum was too proud to ask for help from family or friends. And no matter how much money I earn, or any of us individually earn, it would never be enough to fund all of the investments to prolong and preserve the lives of cancer patients. And we shouldn't have to. Nobody chooses which cancer they end up suffering from. I wonder whether Mum would have been better off if she had breast cancer purely for the higher 5 years survival rate compared to cervical cancer. Imagine if we could leverage large-scale investment for rarer cancers as much as we could for common cancers. The second is memories. Mum never got the opportunity to celebrate all the milestones in our lives. Graduations, Matt becoming an electrician, Aaron buying his first house, my full-time job in Canberra and recent promotion out of the public service, plus future engagements, weddings, kids, the privilege of growing old. Mum made a lifetime of sacrifices, and she never got to celebrate her success. This is the positive ripple effect where my brothers and I finished our education, which allowed us to obtain good employment, earn a good income, buy a house after a lifetime of renting. That was her dream, and we fulfilled it. The third thing is measurements. How do we measure a life? Do we measure it based on a person's intrinsic value? Is it their contribution to their family, their community, our society? Maybe it's all of these reasons. Mum's life adds value to my life, my brother's life, her close friend's life, even after death. Imagine how much more value could be added if she was still here. Imagine how much human misery could be avoided if we invested upfront in finding new cancer treatments for rarer cancers. Mum was on the way to becoming fully employed as a early childhood educator before cancer came crashing back into our lives. She invested in her education up front because she knew it would lead to better employment outcomes, which would benefit society through less reliance on government income support, provide increased taxation revenue, and address staff shortages. Mum was only 38. She had plenty of time left to contribute to the workforce. In conclusion, beyond the money, the memories, the measurements regarding the value of life, I want to emphasize the impact of time. As the 2021 census found, almost half of Australians have a parent born overseas. This means many parents, like my mum, have not grown up in Australia with access to early cancer screening that later generations have had. We need to address this inequity and double down on increased access to cancer treatments now more than ever. Thank you.